That helps as well. Okay. Yeah. Right.
Hanukkah Sameach, good Chodesh, and good morning to everyone. Apologies, and as I said, I'm usually much more relaxed for time when it comes to the earlier starts, but the later starts are actually trickier for me. So let's dive straight into it. With apologies first and foremost. Firstly, thank you for inviting me back. It's good to be back. Apologies first and foremost. I don't know if I've said this idea here before. I've been here a few times now. I know that it was around this time of year once. So if I've said this before, please speak to my lawyers. Because I'm not actually sure. I know we probably have video evidence that can be used in a court case against me. But just to link a number of the ideas that we've been reading in the parashas that we've had there this week, the last few weeks as well, to link those into perhaps a message about Hanukkah that we can take away with us this morning. So there is an idea that links the parashas of Vayeshev and Miketz. So we know that Vayeshev, there's a few of them at this time of year. Vayeshev ends with the quintessential cliffhanger. It's the Lahavdil Elef Alfei Avdolos. It's the the way that a great filmmaker would end a film is where there's this dramatic end and you don't know you can't wait to see what's going to happen next. But unfortunately, you have to, go home and come back again the week after. And we're told this is after Yosef interprets correctly. He dreams of his fellow prisoners, the butler and the baker. We're told V'lo zachar Sar HaMashkim es Yosef v'yishkachehu. The Sar HaMashkim, the butler, lo zachar, forgets or does not remember Yosef v'yishkachehu, and he forgets him. And the Midrash picks up on this repetition, this double emphasis, and it explains that in fact the butler's forgetfulness was not. I don't know if you have this, but do you ever get this where you walk into a room and forget why you went in there in the first place? You walk in, yeah, you walk in. maybe maybe it gets more frequent, but you walk in, you look around the room for inspiration. Why am I here? And then when you go back upstairs, you remember why you came downstairs in the first place. So Chazal, our sages explain that the butler's forgetfulness is not a natural level of forgetfulness. It's not just something that's careless or that he was busy and preoccupied with other things. They explained that his forgetfulness was in fact al derech nes miraculous, that he totally forgot who Yosef even was. And remember, this is the young Hebrew slave that had just secured his freedom from prison. So you'd expect him to have a bit more gratitude towards the person who just interpreted his dreams to his safety. But he forgets him entirely. And Chazal, our sages, explain, and Rashi brings this a bit earlier on, they say that the mistake that Yosef made, as it were, that lands him, as we see in Miketz, with an extra 2 years in prison, is that he beseeches the butler to intercede on his behalf in front of Pharaoh. And he says two key phrases. He says, Ki im zakartani, please, he says, when you leave this prison and go back to your original station as Pharaoh's minister, as his butler, he says, please mention me the Hizkartani and remember me in front of Pharaoh. And Chazal, our sages, say that for those two expressions, Zachartani, Vehizkartani, Yosef is punished with an extra 2 years, one for each expression, to languish in prison. And that seems extremely harsh when we think about it. I mean, is he not just following the logical course of action? He's found himself with an opportunity. He's in a situation where Hashem has given him the ability to interpret these dreams in the first place. He's done so correctly. He happens to be in prison with just the right person who can get him access, as they say, to the big cheese, number one, the man on the throne. And yet he gets taken to task. He's punished for saying these two words. So an explanation that's given, and I often use this is one of my favorite mashalim, one of my favorite parables of who Yosef is and what he represents, and a lesson we can take from his life story, perhaps to our level. And that is the mashal, sadly, with world events and with global weather doing what it's doing. It's sadly becoming a more relevant parable with each passing year. So the parable goes, and I'm sure everyone's heard it before, but we have to reframe it within the kaleidoscope of Yosef's life and what he represents. There's a man standing on his roof. And the reason he's standing on his roof in desperation is because there's been a flood. And the flood waters are rising. They're getting higher and higher. And he stands there on his roof and he cries out to Hashem. He says, please, Hashem, save me. Not quite Fiddler on the roof. His violin's floating on time. So he's standing there on the roof and along comes a speedboat. And as the speedboat draws closer, The man shouts out to the people on the speedboat, "Hey, over here, please! I'm going to drown. Come here and help me. Please save me." The speedboat comes over, and as the speedboat comes over, the man says, "Actually, you know what? Don't worry about it. I have bitachon. I have faith. I have trust in Hashem. He will save me. You can go and save someone else." The speedboat driver is confounded, but he goes off and saves someone else. The waters rise even higher. Then he sees a rescue helicopter hovering overhead. Again, he starts jumping up and down, waving his arms and shouting. The rescue helicopter hovers low, and he says, "Actually, on second thoughts, you know what? I'm a man of faith. Hashem will save me. You fly off and save someone else." The helicopter goes, and as we know, the end of the story, the floodwaters rise. They see exceed his ability to swim, and sadly, this man passes away. And he enters Shammai, he enters heaven, and he turns around to Hashem, and he says, "I don't understand. I had emunah, I had bitachon, I had faith, I had trust in you. Perfect faith, so much so that I was standing there waiting for you to save me." And what does Hashem say to him? Exasperated. Hashem says, "Who do you think sent the speedboat and the helicopter? I was right there to save you." And yet, when it comes to the story of Yosef, when it comes to the story of his attempted escape from prison, which seems like a reasonable and logical thing to do, he is taken to task for even daring to ask for help. The question is why? Those expressions, Zacharatani, Behis Karatani, he is awarded and punished with 2 extra years in prison that only come to a conclusion at the end, as we know, in Parashat Miketz. So what has he done wrong? Any suggestions? What's he done that's so bad? I'm sure any of us in that situation would have done exactly the same thing. Correct? We're not meant to stand back doing nothing. That makes the question stronger. It's from the Gemara. Yeah, yeah, it's very Jewish. It says Jewish is gefilte fish and herring. The strange thing, and sometimes what we need is a bit of a paradigm shift. We have to sometimes shift our perspective on who or what we're talking about and what Yosef represents to us in our tradition. So in a sentence, Yosef represents, he's called in Kabbalistic terms, Tzaddik Yesod Olam, which means the righteous foundation of the earth. At his level of existence, which we're not, I want to make a disclaimer here, I should have this in writing. We, thankfully, are not expected to live our lives on this level of faith. But Yosef still represents, the paradigm he represents is, when we talk about someone who has Ani Ma'amin be'emunah shlema, we know the song, I'm sure, Ani Ma'amin be'emunah shlema, I believe with shlema, complete belief. If I may insult everyone on Chanukah, Rosh Chodesh, and I include myself in this, none of us has emunah shlema, not even close. So it's a nice song to sing. I've been blessed to lead many trips to Poland over the years. It's very powerful, very emotional to sing it, walking down the train tracks, etc. None of us has emunah shlema. It's not possible. None of us has literally complete and perfect faith. And yet Yosef does, or he's meant to. He is meant to represent what is possible when a person has perfect faith. And so the mistake he makes, our sages explain, is not in the fact that the butler helped him get out of prison, but the fact that Yosef intervened and said those 2 words. Please remember me and please mention me in front of Pharaoh. To which Hashem says, a person who is meant to represent absolute faith, that I run the entire world, would not have needed or would not have even seen the need to say those 2 words, trust me. There's those key words. The butler will go off on his own accord and he'll speak to Pharaoh on your behalf. You don't need to do anything. And the equivalent in our mashal, our parable, is if Yosef's on that roof and the flood waters are rising, they're getting closer to putting him in mortal peril, and he sees that speedboat, and this is how hard it is, he's not allowed to jump up and down, waving his arms and shouting. He just has to wait. And if Hashem wants it to be so, the speedboat will come over to him of its own accord. He needs to do nothing. So this level of perfect faith that he represents, where do we see this idea, this belief? that Hashem runs quite literally every aspect of our lives, and we need to do absolutely nothing to intervene. We did nothing to help it. It's almost as if Hashem says to him, with these extra 2 years in prison, you think I can't get, you think you need the butler? You think you need the butler to get out of prison? You think I can't get you out on my own? And that sounds harsh to us because, again, we're not expected to live on that level. Literal shalema purpose. So where do we see this and how do we link this to the Hanukkah story, perhaps with a message to take away for the last remaining days of Hanukkah? So for this, we rewind, excuse me, to Vayishlach. In Vayishlach, we read the story of Yaakov wrestling with good, whoever said an angel, the commonly accepted is whose angel was it? Esav's angel. There are different Mefarshim say it was just a malach. It's not clear exactly who it was. What's interesting is that as far as I've seen, every Perush, every commentary says it was not an ish, it was not a man, a mortal man, it was an angel. And the question that's asked is, the pasuk says, "Vayevaser Yaakov levado," that Jacob was left alone, "Vayeyavek yishimo," and a man or an angel wrestled with him. And the question that the sages ask is, well, why was he left alone? How did it happen? He was separated from the rest of his camp, the rest of his family. No one with him, no one there to help him in this wrestling match. Anyone know what exactly happened? Why was he on his own? He was going, there's a river called the River Yabok, which if we had more time, we'd explain why the River Yabok is extremely similar to the name Yaakov with an I in missing, but maybe that's more for the Kabbalists. But he's crossing, he's ferrying backwards and forwards. What or who is he ferrying? First, his wives and children. Then he goes for servants and maidservants. Then he goes back for the animals, and he thinks he's finished ferrying everything over to safety to the other side. And then what happens? Rashi says, the Gemara in Chulin says, and there's ways of there are allusions to this in the pasuk. Shachach pachim katanim. He forgets small jugs of oil. The chazar aleihim, and he goes back to them. And on this, our sages ask, why on earth would he risk his life when he knows his brother Esav is approaching with 400 men? As far as Yaakov knows, he wants to kill me. Why would he risk his life to go back? Lahavdu, you know what this is like when you're moving house. I don't know if anyone here has moved house. We've done it way too many times already. You know, when you move house, and as you've closed the doors to the van and you give the driver the go-ahead to leave, I realized I forgot the £3 Trofast IKEA bulb that's up there in the loft. Yeah, I bought a set of them once. I never used them, but we went to IKEA and they were on sale. And I put them in that. Are you going to tell the driver to come back? Pay these, you're charging hourly, right? You're not going to tell the driver to come back for your Trofast £3 IKEA light bulbs. And yet Yaakov says to his family, you stay here. I'm going back. I'm putting myself consciously in danger because I forgot these small jugs of oil. And that's the question our sages ask. And the answer they give, and they'll tie this in to finish the Hanukkah, is the lesson Yaakov teaches his family is exactly the lesson that Yosef teaches us, that every single aspect of our lives is governed by the Almighty. And Yaakov says to his family, despite the danger I'm going to be putting myself in, Ani ma'amin be'emunah shalema, I believe with complete faith, that if these small jugs of oil came to be in my possession, it must be that the Almighty intended for me to have them. I don't know why yet. I'm not sure. But if I own them, and if Hashem gave them to me somehow, it must be they are meant to be mine. And to leave them behind is therefore to ignore the divine providence in my life and to turn around to Hashem and say, actually, just as Yosef does in prison to the butler, I know better. I know how to solve this problem. Which Hashem says, no, you don't. I gave them to you for a reason. And Yaakov realizes this. He goes back, risks his life, wrestles with an angel of Hashem just to retrieve these pachin katanim, these small jugs of oil. To which Al-Pi Kabbalah, the Rashal that is brought in the Seder Laderech, who is a super commentary on Rashi, the Seder Laderech says that at that moment, Hashem, as it were, turned around to Yaakov and says, Kashem shemasarta nafshecha, just as you risked your life for the sake of this small gift that I gave you, at some point, this small jug of oil that you went back to get, Kach ani eshalim lebenei bincha, so too will I reward your descendants when one day they need a small jug of oil to bring light and hope back into their world. And that is Hanukkah. Hanukkah is a timely reminder. And I'm often asked by people, I sometimes do get questions on where do we position the Hanukkah vis-a-vis a certain tree? I'll leave it at that. And my answer to that is, what do you mean a certain tree? I hope you mean a potted plant. Is it a eucalyptus? I hope it's not a tree from Scandinavia. But when Hanukkah falls, as it does at this time of year, I always say to our congregants, certainly in Stanmore, I don't think it needs to be said here in the hallowed turf of Edgware, but it really is a timely reminder of who we are and what we stand for and what we represent. And that little bit of oil that lasted for 8 nights itself is a timely reminder that ultimately, although we're here in the depths of the diaspora, the Almighty runs everything. He does have a plan, and our role is simply to help that plan come to its conclusion. Hanukkah Sameach, Chodesh Tov, and Guten Morgen. Thank you very much.
לחפש למען סיכוי ירדיל תורה ונדיר.